Any purchase order transactions can include PJC information. However, the two transactions that directly impact PJC on posting are purchase orders and receipts. Purchase orders will update and increase amounts in the committed column on the contract maintenance window, while receipts will move those amounts from committed to actuals. This means that job-related amounts entered on purchase orders are tracked as commitments against contracts, projects, and categories, and when the purchase orders are received, they become actual costs and quantities incurred on the contracts, projects, and categories. Requisitions can be job-related, but do not affect PJC at all. Invoices will only affect PJC if there are changes made from the original receipt entry, for example, an additional cost or a change in cost. Finally, returns and credit or debit note entries against invoices will affect PJC actual amounts. Let's start with the purchase order transaction. Nothing changes from a typical purchase order entry. The header information remains the same. To make a purchase order job-related, select the Job-Related checkbox. This will make the detail lines on the purchase order accessible for contract, project, category, and resource details. If you selected to create this PO from a requisition that was job-related, the Job-Related checkbox would already be selected. It should be noted that you cannot enter mixed transactions in purchase orders. That is, a single purchase order cannot contain both job-related and non-job-related detail lines. On the detail lines, you can now select the contract, project, and category. The item number column represents the resource based on the cost class of the category selected, and a resource must be entered for both standard and basic projects. For basic projects, the finder for the item number will show all available resources for the category. For example, all inventory items, or all employees, or all subcontractors. For standard projects, the finder for the item number will only show those resources that have been assigned to the project. For projects that are billed in detail, you can edit the billing type, billing rate, and AR item number used for billing. If you are entering a material cost class, then of course all the rules apply as in a normal purchase order. You must specify a location, and can specify a vendor item number and other fields related to inventory items. But in purchase orders, you can enter any cost class, and so this flexibility allows you to enter and track commitments on jobs for any type of cost. For non-material cost classes, you do not have to specify as many details. However, it should be noted that there is no integration between purchase orders and payroll if you are entering labor cost classes here. Once you have entered your details on the purchase order, you can post the entry. Depending on your settings for costing items, during posting or during day-end processing, once the purchase order is processed through day-end, the detail information is posted in PJC and appears on the contract maintenance window in the committed column. Once you are ready to receive the items on a purchase order, you can enter a receipt. Once you call up the purchase order, you can see that again the only difference between a regular receipt entry and a job-related receipt entry is that the job-related checkbox is selected and the detail lines allow for the entry of contract, project, and category information. As with a regular receipt, you can receive all items on this entry or enter partial receipts or even cancel and complete detail lines. For job-related receipts, if you use the purchase order entry to track commitments for cost categories that will be entered elsewhere in Sage Accpac, such as labor or subcontractor costs, you can simply mark those lines as complete with 0 received. This will cancel the purchase order and remove the committed amounts in PJC, allowing you to enter the actual costs in the correct module. For material cost classes, of course, receiving items here will allow the costs and quantities to be transferred from the committed column in PJC to actual costs and quantities. For additional costs entered against receipts and invoices, you are given an option for the proration method to determine how much of the additional costs are sent to PJC, if any. Once you enter an additional cost, you can select the proration method here. Your options include various automatic proration calculations and a manual option. If you select the manual option, you can click the zoom button on the Distribute Proration column to manually select the contract project category allocations for the additional costs. Of course, you can also select No Proration, which will allow the additional costs to be expensed separately without affecting actual costs on the contract project category. Once you have entered your details on the receipt, you can post the entry. Depending on your settings for costing items, during posting or during day-end processing, once the receipt is processed through day-end, the detail information is posted in PJC, and committed amounts originally posted on the purchase order are now transferred to the actuals column. Invoices would only affect PJC if there are any changes or additional costs allocated to the original entries on the receipt. Finally, returns and credit or debit notes can also be job-related and would reduce or increase the actuals in PJC depending on the entry. To track commitments on jobs, there is a report in the Purchase Orders module, as well as in PJC, that allows you to see your outstanding commitments and receipts against previous committed costs and quantities. Now let's take a look at entering PJC transactions in accounts payable.